Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. May I kindly ask you to take your seats that we can start on time? So that's actually very appreciated that you come here that early in the morning on a Sunday, and we actually also do know that there's a lot of other very interesting parallel sessions that are running, so very much appreciating your preference for this one. So this session, as you have seen it in the announcement, is about integrated landscape approaches. And we probably think that you agree with us that these integrated landscape approaches are very important in order to address certain global challenges that we are facing in terms of the degradation of the biosphere. Now, what we do not want today is that we just go out after that session and say, well, this is all important, let's do it. We don't want to do this kind of nodding and shoulder clapping. What we rather want to do is actually have a critical, including a self-critical insight in why, if these integrated landscape approaches have evidence that they perform well in environmental, social, and economic terms, why is it then that we still have this ongoing large-scale degradation of the biosphere? So we actually invite each and everyone to have this kind of critical reflection, and we have a distinguished list of speakers and panelists that first of all provide some of their insight and experience. Later on we have a panel discussion, and later on we open up also for questions of the audience. In terms of the list of speakers and panelists, you're gonna see that there is a certain bias. I gotta say that we haven't been really able to get a very good gender balance on that kind of panel. I hope you criticize us, if anything, for being old, white, and male, but I hope you don't criticize us for being gender blind, because actually we did make quite an effort to bring some of our colleagues onto the stage here who do very wonderful work actually in different parts of Africa and elsewhere in the world. But believe it or not, they are strongly engaged in field work, so they weren't able to make it. Women working in the field, on the fields, and men being available for giving a talk. Sounds somewhat familiar, right? Anyhow, I can definitely promise that both our male and female speakers and panelists will provide a wealth of insight and experience. And I'm very happy that we've been able to get a very distinguished group together that represents think tanks, government agencies, environmental organizations, the European Commission, the United Nations, and also impact investors. And without further ado, I would like to invite Patrick Worms to give one of the introductory presentations. Patrick has an official and an unofficial designation. He works for the World Agroforestry Center, also known as ICRAF. His official designation is Senior Policy Advisor. His unofficial designation, and you see it in the presentation title, is he is a stuff rocker. Not staff, stuff rocker, and he rocks stuff actually from the Arctic to the Amazon. Patrick Worms.
Thank you very much, Dietmar. I must say it was an absolute pleasure to organize this session with you. And I know it's Sunday morning and half of you would rather be in bed and the other half would rather be on a sports field. So I appreciate the fact that you're here enormously. But the reason we are here is an extremely serious one. We know that restoration matters, but would we bet on it? And before I get into that, let me give you my credentials. Yes, I'm with the World Agroforestry Center, but I'm also the president of the European Agroforestry Federation. And as you can tell from the central drawing, which was literally drawn on a napkin when I gave a speech one evening, I'm pretty passionate about what I do. And the reason I'm passionate about it is because it's time to panic. I want you to panic. The reason we have to panic is because our institutions fail. The UNFCCC, for example, has been meeting for 25 years now, and it has one single job. And that job is to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. That red line shows what has actually happened to greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. It has failed. And that failure has consequences. Drought in Europe, drought in Australia, massive floods and cyclones in Mozambique, enormous floods that have destroyed the American planting season this year in the US. And this is not something that the world is doing to us poor agriculturalists. This is something we're doing to ourselves. It doesn't matter how you count. Some people say agriculture, forestry, and land use is 15% or 25% or 35%. Whatever it is, it's about a quarter. It's enormous. So not only are we suffering the consequences of climate change, but we are one of the biggest factors contributing to it. And to do all of that, what do? We destroy the very basis on which we live. We tend to think of land degradation as something that only affects poor, underdeveloped countries, such as the ones in these red circles. But it's happening everywhere. The deep, rich soils of Ukraine are disappearing. The deep, dark soils of Kansas have lost 80% of their mass already. Meanwhile, human populations keep on growing and growing and growing. And they get richer and richer and richer. They want more and more higher quality food. But how can you get food when your land is being washed away by storms or being blown away by the wind? How can you get food when the cost of dealing with this issue is rising relentlessly and is already reckoned to be somewhere in the region of 17% of GDP? Now, for those of you who don't believe there is any hope, I do have some suicide pills in my bag, and you're welcome to come and see me after the presentation to get them. But I do want to first let you see why we believe there is hope, why we agroforesters get out of bed in the morning with a spring in our step. Look at this picture. Both of these properties are ranches. Both of these properties are being managed by old white men in South Africa. The guy on the left knows what he's doing. The guy on the right is simply following the textbook. Look at this. This is the landscape that gave us the song, "Do They Know It's Christmas?" The song that Bob Geldof wrote and performed to raise money for the famine's victims in Tigray in the late 1980s. This is what the same landscape looks like today. It's been transformed, utterly transformed. When I was there, I can say I had tears in my eyes. It was a spiritual experience to see how fundamental transformation can be and how much better it can make a place that a mere generation ago was a byword for misery and despair. Or looking a bit further back, the famines in Niger in the 1970s and 80s, remember those? Well, that's what that landscape looks like today. Enormous agroforestry parklands that are helping farmers raise food in good and bad years alike. And this is where the hope comes from. These results are not the latest in agrochemicals, the fantastic mechanization, apps on your phone or GPS satellites or any of that bullshit. It's not even money. It's management. It's people. It's hands and brains, people understanding their landscapes and managing it well. And there's another source of hope. That means it's cheap. The costs of doing that kind of restoration are in the region of a few tens of dollars per hectare. Why? Because you don't need to bring capital-intensive goods in there. You don't need to build up infrastructure. You just need to work with the tools that nature gives you in your particular bit of the planet. So, if we believe that there is hope, what is it we need to get to paradise? What do we need to do? Well, the first thing that we need is smallholders, lots of them. This guy, Joe Studwell, who's an economist who probably wouldn't recognize an agroforestry system if it hit him in the face, correctly identified that every single nation on earth that developed and has become a developing nation, from Japan and the US and Germany to Taiwan, China, or Japan, started with investing in its smallholders and improving its agricultural productivity. Not by giving them free fertilizers or mechanization, but by increasing their knowledge base. The second thing you need, and here is an example that we know from around the world today. That's figures from the FAO from 5 years ago, and they show that it doesn't matter what the crop is, or it doesn't matter in which country you are, the smaller farms are more productive than the biggest farms. The second thing you need is trust and good governance. There are parts of the world where if some NGO puts in a solar panel-fueled water pump for irrigation, your correct economic strategy is to steal the solar panel before your neighbor steals it. There is no trust in that society. It's extremely difficult to operate in societies without any trust. And you need good governance, such as this example here in Ethiopia, where people's free labor is being coordinated, they pay taxes in labor if you like, is being coordinated to build the kind of infrastructure that regreens landscapes. But perhaps the most important thing you need, you're going to see it coming, you agroforesters, is trees. And I'm just going to leave you with a few examples of how important trees are across the entire world. We know they work in the humid tropics. We know they work in the semi-arid drylands. We know they work in the temperate zone. But did you know that they also work high in the north, in the Arctic? Agroforestry is the future because it delivers. It generates higher levels of biomass, higher levels of resilience, better protection of soils than anything else. And it doesn't matter what you measure. Here's an example from oil palm. Here is an example from fertilizer trees in Malawi. And that leads us to the conclusion that the opportunity is there. We can save our assets. We can restore productivity and function. We can take these vast areas of degraded and deforested lands around the world, and we can put them back into production, into agriculture, into agroforestry, and into forests. And I'm going to leave you here with one final question, which our speakers and our panelists are going to address. Ladies and gentlemen, if this is the future, why does the world look like this? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for this truly rocking presentation that took us from the humid tropics to the Arctic and that gave a very good summary of where the challenges are, but also where the solutions are. Now moving on, I have bad news and good news to share. Bad news is our next speaker, Nesrin Al-Amin, did not get the visa and was not able to make it here in person. The good news is she was really taking the challenge and helped us out with a great presentation that is video recorded. So as you are uploading the video recorded presentation, I would like to introduce Nesrin Al-Amin as a climate policy advocate. And she is also working for an NGO that she has founded, which is called Search Africa. So after our, sorry to say, Patrick, old, white, and male view on the world, we now get the young, female, and black view on the world. This is a view from the grassroots in Africa. Nesrin Al-Amin.
Hello, my name is Nesrin Al-Amin. I am a climate justice advocate in Nigeria, and I will be speaking about why landscape approaches struggle in Africa. One of the most fundamental reasons why landscape approaches fail in Africa is because of government's failure to target its support in the right direction. For instance, the government may decide on a loan scheme or intervention to help farmers, but officials of this ministry could divert these resources and direct them to their own interested parties. So hardly ever any intervention reaches the people that it's intended to reach. Another reason is that these loans require for collateral that the farmers are unable to provide. And in most cases, these farmers are not seen as creditworthy, and they lack the ability to coordinate themselves in an organized way to demand for the support that they need. Another issue is that of information and communication. Many farmers lack access to the facts, information, techniques, or the skills to integrate their practices. At Search Africa, our organization, we carry out climate resilience training in vulnerable communities. And often sometimes people ask us this question: how do you expect us to stop using pesticides and fertilizers without providing us a better alternative? By that statement, they mean a chemical alternative. So these people are still heavily invested in their old ways. And what's worse, our schools and universities are still promoting the use of these chemicals instead of agroecology and agroforestry practices. Gender equality remains a barrier in our communities. Whether a woman is a casualty of war who is being raped in exchange for food or living in a peaceful community, women are known to engage in a lot of labor-intensive activities, but most importantly, our women farm. And yet, these same women are being marginalized and excluded from important decision-making, from opportunities, and from equal share of profit for the sole reason that they are women. In some places, women are not allowed to own land or properties, and so the issue of land tenure and land grabbing remains a sketchy business in Africa. For instance, the state may decide to grant public land to the local leadership, and the local leadership may lease the land to a farmer, but a nomadic pastoralist may lay claim to the clover that grows on the farm, and another person may lay claim to the tree in the farm that you thought was yours. So all these issues further complicate matters. Around the world, farmers are old and are getting older, and farming doesn't seem to be very appealing to young people. Young people are more inclined to divert and to migrate from their villages and work in offices or at factories. So there is need to make farming more attractive. There is need to invest in smallholder farmers because they have the capacity and the ability to scale simple solutions. Another issue is industrial farming. Industrial farming undermines smallholder farmers in the sense that they could go to a community and then occupy a big chunk of land, and they may begin a crop plantation of what is not needed in the region, and the smallholder farmers would then not be able to produce the need of the population, and that creates a complication and problems for both parties. This image portrays the reality of millions of people in Africa, in the Sahel, in the Horn of Africa, and across many other regions. To these people, this is yet another occurrences of violent conflict. Those who are yet to encounter such demise dread whether or not they could be the next village. This is what happens when environmental degradation meets population growth. Environmental conflict and insecurity remains one of the greatest challenges to integration in Africa. So how do we expect people to settle for advanced agricultural practice when they are running helplessly for their lives? This is what happens when we fail to restore our land. A lot of people in this room today must have contributed a lot to the future of our planet, and yet you have failed us immensely. Your efforts are simply not enough. Unless we begin to create inclusive solutions to land restoration issues, unless we begin to view this crisis through the scope of the vulnerable African people, eco-restoration remains unattained across the globe. So then I would ask you this question. What approaches are you going to bring that are different from your previous one? What measures can be taken to integrate land restoration? But most importantly, what are the solutions that you would propose that align with the cultural values, ways of life, environment, and the future of the African people?
Thank you very much. A warm hand for Nesrin. And really very much appreciated Nesrin made this effort. That was the first time for her also to practice this kind of video recording, and I think that was a very strong message also from really the grassroots. Now I would like to invite our next speaker, Christopher Martius. Christopher Martius is a team leader for climate change, low carbon reduction, and something else. And he is working for the Center of International Forestry Research, CIFOR, and I'm very much looking forward to learn what the difference is between jellyfish and boxfish.
Thanks, Dietmar. And I'm a biologist, but I'm not going to go into a biology lecture about jellyfish and boxfish. So if you're expecting that, then you're wrong. But where's my PowerPoint? Where's the... So I'm using this as a metaphor. The question is about landscape approaches, interdisciplinary approaches. Why are we doing them? And where do we get with them? And to go from this to the landscape approach, I know it's a little bit of a stretch, but imagine just this as a metaphor for how we normally encapsulate problems. We want to see them cute and little and square and not complicated. So this square fish is maybe somehow in the fish world or in the subaquatic world representing this kind of thinking. But when we go out there in the real world, the pictures you've seen in Patrick's presentation and so on, then you see the problem, the world is actually quite complicated, and the problems come at us in many ways and in this form of rather soft and something involving you and reaching out in many dimensions. And that's why people have coined the ideas of integrated approaches, multidisciplinary approaches, landscape approaches. And I want to go a little bit into reflecting about this. So it's jellyfish and boxfish landscapes, and understanding of landscapes, and what can we learn for integrated approaches at the landscape scale. This is one aspect. This comes from the work of my colleague Ann Larsen, who works in CIFO's Peru office, the complexity of governance. If you look at the different elements of what is in a landscape, and this is actually a very nice animated graph. If you go to the CIFO website, then you can click on all of these things and the different aspects show up. So if you go into the different aspects of a landscape, all palm plantation, I can't read the second one, smallholder communities, native communities, mining, protected areas, and so on. Then you see they're all governed by different institutions and in different scales. So nothing of this overlaps. So this already creates a lot of complication in managing a landscape with the existing institutions, and this is one of the problems. I've looked a little bit into the literature, not systematically, but trying to find a few things that deal with how to address these problems. For example, this paper here by two ecologists in Science from 2015 writes about principles for developing effective environmental policy, particularly looking at conservation issues and their links to development policy. So they came up with 4 principles. Policy robustness, so policies that address this should perform well despite scientific uncertainty and advances in scientific understanding. And they should be managing the risks and the dynamics in a system instead of providing stationary solutions. So solutions should be heterogeneous and provide different options to different people. And what is important also, and this is what many other scholars also say, monitoring and assessment. You need to understand what you're doing, you need to understand what is the result of what you're doing, and you need to respond to it. So you need to manage responsiveness and flexibility. And this is what we very often fail to do. We think we have one solution, and that's now going to be the solution we run with. If you go a bit further, then this is from the, at least in CIFO circuits, quite famous paper by Seyer and others on 10 principles for a landscapes approach. And you see the green ones are more or less the same that I just showed in the other slide, or at least similar. Continual learning and adaptive management, that was the last point in the other slide. Multifunctionality and heterogeneity, resilience management, but they have a few other points here, and most of them somehow circle around people, stakeholders, negotiation of different interests, clarification of rights and responsibilities, participation, and strengthening stakeholder capacity. So these are 10 principles, but most of them, I think, go somehow around the question how we involve people in this. The one flexibility that was in the previous slide, in the previous scheme, is maybe also contained indirectly in those, but it is not necessarily explicit. It could relate to the negotiated change, for example. This is an example from a project that I was lucky to co-manage when I was working at ZEF, the Center for Development Research here at the University of Bonn, on restructuring of land and water use in a region of Uzbekistan. Khwarezm is down by the Aral Sea, just south of the Aral Sea. It's an irrigated landscape, and the idea was actually brought up by the German Ministry of Education and Research to do something about the Aral Sea drying out. So we looked at the conditions of land and water use in that region and carried out an interdisciplinary analysis. So if you want a landscape approach, and we had a lot of field work and capacity development on land, on water, on crops, trees. There's a lot of irrigated agriculture, there's a lot of salinization, there's a lot of land degradation, and there's a lot of poverty in this. So it's a complex situation, made more complex by government interventions on agriculture. So the what crops you grow is mandated. It has to be cotton and wheat, and then you can have a little vegetable garden and so on. And it's a very unaccommodating policy environment. At least it was at the time. This project ended in 2010. Now there are changes in Central Asia, policy changes. There's a lot more openness for innovation. But at the time, it was very hard to get into some of these areas, particularly in the more social area that was mostly a no-go. In the water management, that was a no-go. So what did we do? We tried to make this jellyfish problem, ramifying out into many directions, into something more simple, more boxy, by breaking it down into sectoral recommendations that were all based in this interdisciplinary analysis, but that were meant to speak to experts in the sectoral ministries, in this case, the Ministry of Water and Agriculture, to address a few of the technical issues. And we thought these are well tested, these are well researched on their social and environmental and income implications, and that's what we can suggest to the government, because that was the only way to bring innovation in at the time through a formal application to the ministry to act on these four things. What we also did, I say it above, is capacity development. So we had a lot of empowerment of local students, and we hope that with the opening now, these things may actually come back. This is all basically sitting there and waiting. So sometimes you have to break down things and make them simpler, because people simply cannot deal with this. One of the problems here was the sectoral approach in the ministries, and we could not break it up, so we tried to respond to that in the right way. So we made it from jellyfish into a boxfish. And this is another aspect also coming from Anne Larson and written up in a book we recently published about Red Plus, which is a totally different jellyfish problem. But basically you can, and often this multidisciplinary coordination and landscape approaches are meant to increase collaboration and come to a common solution. But sometimes you have underlying power relations that keep actually the problem from being addressed in the right way, because you simply cannot get around those differences in interests, and particularly if the power is not equally distributed, then some groups may win over the others. So not always is a landscape approach automatically a solution unless you address this specifically through the mechanisms like negotiation, mediation, or maybe law enforcement, or maybe collective action in order to break up these situations. So my last slide is actually not 3 conclusions. I wanted to take this out, but it's only 2. But basically, the message here is not to rewrite these 10 principles or 4 principles or whatever. And I know there's a lot more research out there by colleagues like James, Reid, and who worked with CIFO and so on. But what I want you to take home is basically two aspects. First, I think what we normally forget in the enthusiasm, we have to have a landscape approach, we have to bring in this problem and that problem, because they all are part of the problem. We need also to find ways to simplify. We need to find ways to bring it back into a more boxy approach that people can handle, that people can deal with, because very often the very complex approach and very complex solutions cannot be handled properly. And we need to find cutoff points. Where can we decide, at which point can we decide this one thing we don't need to address right now because it doesn't belong to the problem, although it may be important, but not in this context. So managers very often are very sectoral, ministries are sectoral, and we need to address this. And the second thing is manage the stakeholders, be alert to the different interests, search for common denominators that can then grow. Like in climate change, the NDCs are one of those approaches, where you say we start low and we try to grow it. Whether it works is another question, but at least you can get people on the same platform with this and manage the trade-offs. And that's my message. And these are the pictures also and references. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christopher. I actually didn't know that there are anything like square-shaped animals, and you really presented a cutie. This boxfish is really very, very nice allegory also for this kind of square thinking, then the kind of need for embracing complexity, but from there bringing it back into something that is operational. Actually, one of your slides reminded me on the board game that some of you might know, Settlers of Catan, where it's actually all about controlling natural resources. But one element missing in Settlers of Catan is the financial flows. There's also finance behind natural resources. And that actually allows me to invite Bas Lohman, who is going to provide us more insight on the finance that stands behind scaling integrated landscape approaches. Bas is working as a program coordinator at Tropenbos International, a Dutch foundation. Bas.
Thank you, Dietmar. Good morning, everybody. Okay, I'm actually very grateful to Patrick, because he already introduced a little bit some of the assumptions that we did. Tropenbos is working together with the FTA program, particularly in C4, in Flagship 3. And we've been looking at, we said there's a big gap. There's smallholders. Yeah, they are occupy a large part of the agricultural land, or the cultivated land, and they have difficulties in accessing finance to actually make changes to the way they operate. Yeah, and in Latin America, we've seen several studies that look at climate smart agriculture, and they find that larger companies, they are actually closer to climate smartness than smallholders, and basically because the smallholders don't have the knowledge and don't have the finance to actually make the change. So we wanted to look at how we can make finance more inclusive so that it reaches the smallholders, that they can make their decisions, make their changes, and that contributes to sustainable landscapes. We did so in several exercises, and this is actually a start of what we say a consultative journey. We started with some interviews of selected stakeholders throughout what we call the value chain of finance. And we also did some literature study, and after the GLF, we will have a webinar in about 3 weeks' time, followed by an e-dialogue to talk more about this topic, because we don't really want to just look at the academic side of it. We also want to have the opinion of stakeholders on whether this is useful or not, what we're doing. And through the interviews, we already saw that there are some differences in how, for example, finance is being interpreted. And how inclusiveness of finance is being interpreted. So what we're trying to look at through this whole scheme, the main question is what types of financial innovations can stimulate private and public investments in projects which contribute to more sustainable landscapes, yet are also inclusive of the rural poor. The key informants came from the public sector, financial institutions, corporate sector, and community. And we split up that main question in 4 specific questions that we'll look at in a moment at some of the answers. These were the institutions that or organizations that we interviewed. So the first 3 are more like the supportive organizations for landscape approaches and for trees within those landscapes. Then the Forum is a company, FMO is the Dutch Development Bank, New Forest is an investment company, ACOFOP is actually a community association, and they have also a commercial branch, and Comasa is an integrated forestry company which started up about 11 years ago and increased enormously. So we have throughout the range of that value chain of the finance, we have some opinions, but these are only opinions, and we try to back that up with literature research, and then we hope to get more opinions in the following weeks. Then when we talk about inclusiveness, there's basically 4 different views of what that inclusive actually means. One is from the outside, so the supporting organizations is more closer to what we also find in the literature review, an equitable distribution among all involved, particular focus on most vulnerable. Then if you look at the finance sources and the fund managers, they are more content with if a consultation has been taken place and whether local people actually consciously get involved in an activity, in an investment. Yeah, and then they'll get access to an increased income. Yeah, but if you talk to, for example, ACOFOP, yeah, and also COMASA, they say, well, inclusiveness, that's for us, you don't need to define it. Yeah, what we need is money that fits our needs. Yeah, so it is for them basically an academic question. And they found their solutions independent of government issues, independent of companies. Yeah, of course, with some help. In spite of these different definitions of what inclusiveness is, they all found more or less main barriers along the financial value chain. Yeah, you start then at the production side, lack of financial literacy, business management skills. Yeah, basically makes that smallholders or corporations or community enterprises cannot qualify for commercial loans. Yeah, and often also cannot write their own projects. So they cannot really express their own needs into terms that can be financed. Yeah. Then, on the other hand, there's also a lack of understanding about needs for those agroforestry enterprises. Yeah, from the part of the banks, of the or international organizations. Yeah, but that expresses them in, for example, requirements of their financial products. So they offer a range of financial products, but communities, smallholders, they cannot actually obtain those. They cannot meet the requirements for that. Yeah, so the two of them need to be really come closer. They need to be in touch much closer. Yeah, then there's also a lack of local infrastructure. So basically, when you go to a financer, go to a bank, in an international bank, but even a local bank, yeah, they want to invest in scale. Yeah, and that scale isn't there. So you need some intermediary that can aggregate and that can actually create that scale. Yeah, and then, and we saw also that for smallholders to make changes, actually they don't need that much money. Yeah, Patrick already said, well, $20, less than $20 a hectare to restore. Yeah, but even that money, very often they don't have that extra. So that needs from them, their part, an investment in something where the benefits may come in 5-10 years' time. So you need a local infrastructure that can actually bring those smallholders together so you can invest in there, yeah, and also share the risks between the different stakeholders. Yeah, and then in the end there's a shortage of bankable projects which really relate to these 3 points before. But in general then we can say there's a weak enabling environment. Some solutions meet the demands of finance sources. For example, COMASA, they said, okay, that is what the finance people want. Well, we create those capacities internally, and we're going to meet the needs of the banks, and of the financial sources to actually get that money. And they were able to do that. It took time, 10 to 11 years, and now they can actually get commercial loans. Yeah, they started out with grants, then they had concessional loans, and now they can get commercial loans. Yeah, but they get there. Another said, in the case of ACOFOP in Guatemala, they said, okay, we can't get loans from the bank, so let's do it ourselves. Yeah, they received project funding with NGOs for 20 years, more or less. Yeah, but they used those funds to set up their own productive business. Yeah, they started producing timber and non-timber forest products, and from the income from that, they set money aside and they put it into a fund. And that fund now they use to help the communities, that they can get loans or they can also borrow equipment from the organization. Yeah, then if you look at the NGOs or the government agencies, say, okay, we have to provide support to strengthen financial literacy and to link local cases to potential sources. And if you look at the companies or the investment organizations, they now partner with local organizations that can aggregate and have local experience. Yeah, they should help you and redistribute the finance, and they can provide also the technical assistance required. Yeah, there are actually some examples that we're finding in literature. Yeah, but we're not publishing it yet because we also need the response of the organization itself, that whether we give a good description. If you go to literature, really, there's very incomplete information on that. But some examples are, for example, New Forests, an interesting investment company that was interviewed here as well, but also the tropical, what's it called, Tropical Landscape Finance Facility, which ICRAF also is a member of that. It's interesting, but there's not complete information yet on what's happening there. But what about landscapes? The people that we interviewed really do not explicitly consider landscape. Their focus is sectorial. They do nice things, but in the end, landscape is an afterthought. The only exception in the people that we interviewed was maybe the New Forest. They actually have an explicit landscape approach, which considers then 6 different elements. But that also comes back to what Christopher said, that it's too complicated. So they rather go implement in a sectorial approach, in a box approach. But the risk is then that you can get investments, very often large scale, because that's what the money is for. And then you go into a landscape, you convert the landscape into an oil palm landscape, or you convert it into a coffee landscape. And then what happens to the smallholders? They either have to leave, or they have to participate in the same thing. If they were before subsistence farmers, this may increase their risks because now they go only to a monocrop cultivation. So there's a lot of potential negative impacts of that. And I actually will have a different presentation in a panel in a moment after this one, where we will talk a little bit more about that. So what is the way forward? Enabling environment needs to be strengthened, and there's a number of points, which you can read because I see my time is up. But basically, what we say here, well, it is important to partner, and the government has a role in there, to help finance, to strengthen the enabling environment, in order to also to get the commercial money in there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bas. Thank you, Bas. I think that was an excellent overview of the kind of bottlenecks and challenges that there are for smallholders, for communities to access finance. I think to me it also explains a bit better why financial management is yet to be incorporated into the Settle of Catan kind of board game. Maybe to get a bit more insight on how that can work, I would like to invite our next speaker, Bernard Giraud. Bernard Giraud is the president, the co-founder of Livelihood Venture, which is a social enterprise that is managing a set of investment funds, currently with a portfolio of more than 200 million euro that have been set up in partnership with French and other major international companies. Bernard.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Bernard Giraud, and I'm very happy today to share some experience we've had with our investment funds. When I read the list of participants of the conference, I felt a bit isolated because there are not so many business people in the audience and in the conference. So I feel like I am the nasty representative of the nasty business. Because basically the role of the Livelihood Fund is to help transform the business from inside. Because we believe that, like it or not, the business has a role to play. And if we do not transform fundamentally in a systemic approach the way business behaves, we will not make it. And as Patrick said before, there is an urgent need to move ahead. So what is basically the Livelihoods Fund? It has been done to invest in projects. Investors are large corporations, about 200 billion euro sales, the total of the 12 corporations that have invested in our funds. We manage 3 funds, 2 are carbon funds, and 1 is sourcing funds, investing in large-scale projects to transform the way big companies are sourcing commodities. The way we operate the model is quite simple. We invest not at all in any land property. We don't own anything. We just help smallholder farmers at scale to change their practices and to have an impact on the communities, but also on the landscape. Those projects generate social, environmental, and economic benefits, and we capture a portion of it, for example, carbon credit, to give back to the fund the return. Or we take a fee on the volumes that are produced, sustainable volumes that are produced from the project. So it's a never-ending fund. Companies have invested equity in the fund. The fund invests in projects in partnership with NGOs and different kind of organizations. I will talk about it. And then the benefits are for the farmers, for the communities, but also for the business and for the fund. It's a kind of a shared value mechanism that is based on results. Payments are always result-based. The good news is that it works. I mean, it's not easy, and Patrick said at the beginning there are good example, and we can see it. It's possible to make things happen. In Madagascar, we have a coalition of 4 companies. They are committed to purchase vanilla from a whole area on 10 years. In Andhra Pradesh, in India, we have invested with 10,000 farms on coffee and land restoration at the whole landscape on 20 years. We are developing traceability models in Philippines on coconut. So it's possible to do things with the private sector. When the private sector was under pressure a few years ago from activists, from NGOs, they reacted through certification. Certification has been for long the solutions. We know today that it's not. It has been useful, probably, but it's mainly to protect the reputation of company against the worst practices. But it doesn't address the root causes of the problem. So what we need is a transformation, a deep transformation. And what I can see in the business is that more and more people understand the need for transformation. And they are ready to embark. We had recently a very promising talks about biodiversity with heads of very large corporations. And I can see that the mindset is moving. So it is the right time now to switch from, I would say, defensive attitude to more transformative approach. What is surprising is that there are a lot of talks, there are a lot of pledges, there are a lot of research, there is a lot of announcement of new funds, but when you are in the field, you don't see so much achievement. So why is it so? I think, first, when we say the private sector should engage, we keep it as a very general level. We say, okay, is Unilever or Nestlé or Danone or whatever, Mars, engage on this and that? That's true. And that's absolutely necessary, but it's not enough. The reason why we are struggling to develop landscape approaches with smallholder farmers in palm, for example, in Indonesia, it's because we need to align the whole supply. Those consumer good companies don't purchase from farmers. There are some exceptions, but in general, they purchase processed products from refineries, and the refineries purchase from mills. Sometimes there are several levels of refineries, depending on the type of product they purchase for their final product. So what we need is to align the whole value chain. And if we are not able to make a deal with a local company or an international company that is controlling the purchasing at mill level, at the field level, at the closest level to the farmers, there is no reason why we should succeed. And that is difficult. And that's what we are trying to do. I would say we are not investment fund, we are deal makers. I would say money is not really an issue. It's it's part of it. But the most difficult is coalition building and alignment of takers and business partners at the field level up to the international level when it makes sense. The second thing is business talk a lot about coalition, but very often it's very general coalition. We signed a pledge on zero deforestation. We commit to do the best for humanity. It's great, okay, fine. But I would prefer coalition at field level. Coalition between 2, 3, 4 companies that purchase from a given area, where there is a landscape issue, when there are productivity issues, and they align on very clear, very precise objective, dealing with public partners, NGOs, research, whatever. But it is something that is square, that is contractual, not general, with guidelines, with objective, with measurement, with monitoring, with result-based payment. And then it makes the mindset of companies change radically. The second thing is we need to come with models that are operational. Why a farmer should switch from monoculture that is degrading the soils on palm or cocoa, whatever, to a more diversified model through agroforestry. If we don't come with solution that works and that deliver not only from an environmental point of view, but also from an economical point of view, there is very little reason why this farmer will switch from the monoculture he's practicing today to another model. So we need absolutely to come with, and it's really something that we need to do together, and the research has a much more practical, for me, role to play to come with operational solution at field level. Another issue is that we need to transform the relationship with farmers. If companies want sustainability, and at the same time, they don't want to engage on the long term because they want to practice what has been the rule in the business for years. Flexibility was really the rule. If I get a better deal from another area to purchase my communities, I will do it. But how can you engage the deep transformation with farmers if you don't commit to purchase long-term, whatever the circumstances are? So we need a deep transformation of the relationship with farmers. And at the same time that we help farmers to increase their productivity sustainably, we can have also, we can impose also some rules in order that there is loyalty from the farmers as well. But it means also that we have to discuss everything, including the price schemes. And that's what we are doing today. I am very surprised, positively surprised, that when we created the Livelihood Fund a few years ago, it was absolutely impossible to talk about purchasing price. It was, you know, something like, you cannot touch that. You can discuss everything about planting trees, about dealing with farmers, that's fine, but this is business. And today, when you see the drop of market price of cocoa, for example, or coconut, when it takes us 5 years to increase by between 30 to 40% the farmers' productivity and income at farm level, and when they lose 50% in 1 year, in a few months, through market price, global price, you can see the challenge. And the business realizes that now, that it's not possible to go this way. We cannot enforce a transformation if we are not committed long-term with win-win relationship, on the one hand farmers, NGOs, public authorities, and the business. And I would end my presentation saying there is absolutely no way that we can do anything positive if we are not able to embark the farmers. The farmers are the real actors of the change. And one of the transformation that we have to foster with the business is that they have to understand the value of smallholder farmers in their supply chain. Not theoretically, not because they want to stop child labor. They should be much more ambitious than avoiding those very negative practices. They should engage in, for example, preparing a new generation of young farmers who are taking care of the land, who are getting a decent income from farmers. There is absolutely no reason why, in the long term, we should source, large companies should source from very poor people degrading their planet. So at the end of the day, the positive message I would like to share with you, I can see the changes in the mindset of companies' leaders, at least the one who are engaged seriously in sustainability. It's a deep change. It will take time, and you have a very important role to play to become the business partners of those changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard. Actually very encouraging that you ended on a positive note after having walked us through some of the major challenges that you also perceive from a broader finance and investment perspective. And one of the four, I think, challenges you alluded to was designing coalitions at the landscape level that work and function beyond the project boundaries. And that's a great transition, actually, to James Reid's presentation, who I invite onto the stage, because he's going to walk us what it takes, actually, to move from a project on to a process. James Reid is a senior researcher at the Center for International Forestry Research, as part of the Sustainable Livelihoods and, no, the other way around, Sustainable Landscape and Livelihoods component. James.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I've just been promoted. I'm just a researcher for C4, not a senior researcher. Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about our research team's focus on integrated landscape approaches. Let me find the buzzer. So first, I'm going to provide some background. So C4 is a forestry research organization, but if you look at the back catalogue of C4's work, which I'm sure you all have, you'll know that C4 have always conducted research that have looked at integrating conservation development across a landscape scale, but that's been variably described throughout the history of C4's work, and also external of C4 as well. So you had community-based conservation, adaptive collaborative management, integrated conservation development projects, and then more recently, this idea of an integrated landscape approach. And this is what our research team has really been specifically focused on for the last 7 years. And so I'm going to try to provide some reflections on that 7 years in the next 8 minutes, which will be easy. So this isn't just an opportunity to get more citations for our team, but to give you an idea of the work we've been doing. So the 10 principles Christopher has already talked about. We had the 10 preconditions for success. This book called Evidence-Based Conservation, which looked at integrated conservation development projects in the Mekong Delta, 15 examples, and basically what we found is that there's still this kind of narrow focus, overly sectoral, overly narrow spatial scales, so essentially looking at protected area management, and overly biophysical. And so that kind of got us into this idea of thinking, what are landscape approaches then, and how are they different to everything that's come before? And we conducted these 2 systematic reviews which looked at the theoretical development of landscape approaches and also the implementation across the tropics. And what we found is essentially the theory is very strong, the implementation and the evaluation particularly not so. So the review of case studies, we found 174 across the tropics. This is from a screening of 16,832 documents, 174 examples. Only 24 of those were in the peer-reviewed literature, so mostly grey literature examples. And that's not to say we found everything. Of course, there were limitations to our study, but it gave us an idea that the theory is strong, the evaluation not so much. And then more recently, we've been trying to develop ways of trying to fill these gaps by trying to understand how better to measure and monitor and evaluate landscape approaches, and then recently a special issue in environmental management led by Miriam Ross-Tonen, one of our partners at Amsterdam, that looked at different configurations of landscape approaches and how landscape approaches evolve in practice in a number of different contexts. So that gets us to this point where we kind of, like I said, think we have a fairly good understanding of the theory. We have these 10 principles that we still think have a lot of value. Perhaps they don't do so much in terms of understanding how we monitor the governance of these landscape approaches. And essentially, a landscape approach is a governance strategy. And I think related to that, this idea of polycentric governance has gained a lot of weight, of multi-level governance. But I think there's still things that are being overlooked with regard to landscape approaches. There's a nice paper that came out just this week, actually, that talks about, while there's a lot of fanfare for polycentricity, we're still not sure of the evaluation of these approaches. We're still not sure of the power dynamics and how we're understanding them. And so what we're trying to do now, we've recently secured funding from the German government, from ICI, the International Climate Initiative, to operationalize landscape approaches. So we're trying to understand how the theory can feed into operationalizing landscape approaches. And then hopefully, if we can do a good job of reporting that progress, we can then feed back into the theory. So yeah, a few reflections. Those of you that have been to a few of the recent GLFs will know that one of the taglines is "It's all connected." And while I still want to get invited back next year, I want to kind of say that actually what we're finding is it's all disconnected. And I think, this has been alluded to in a lot of the presentations already. And it's not just at policy level where you have ministries not really engaging, but it's even below the national policy, not engaging with the local governments. They're not engaging with regional economic zones. Research, practice, and policy are all disconnected. And so one of the things that we're trying to do with these landscape approaches is trying to bring these connections together. And we had a recent Inception workshop in Zambia, and it was, it's really interesting to see these people in a room that don't normally get together. And, they were quite clear that they have issues, and these issues are coming out very strongly in these landscapes. So then, of course, when you're implementing a landscape approach, you also need to carefully consider whose is the landscape and who is going to lead the approach. So as I said, it's about making connections, and of course that's very important, but these are highly contested spaces. And you're working with multiple sectors, multiple disciplines, knowledge systems, issues of rights, which I think have been talked about a lot over the last couple of days, which is great, and rights to land and resources. Historical legacies, and that can be legacies from colonialism, but also legacies of prior interventions. And so this picture is the Zambia landscape that we're working in, and one thing that they were really keen to ask of us is how is this landscape approach different to all of the other projects that have come and gone through this landscape over the past however many years. And so I guess one of the things we're really trying to do, like it says in the title, is moving away from this project idea and moving more towards a process and long-term engagement in these landscapes. And so, one of the problems is, of course, we have to conform to the systems that we're currently working in. And the problem of dealing with donors is obviously an issue. We need to engage donors, but there's been a certain history of the donors driving the research agenda, and I think that's something that Anne Larson also talked about yesterday. We need to have more engagement with the donors and try to get away from this idea of the tyranny of the log frame, it's been called by some colleagues. And we were really clear with our donors that we can't commit to having really rigid log frames because we're dealing with complex issues, and this kind of linearity, unidirectional project approach doesn't really work. Of course, we have things within our proposal that we have to commit to, but our donors are actually really good. They allowed that flexibility. They allowed a lot of ambiguity within our proposal, and they actually, once they kind of this was a long process. It took 2 years to secure the funding, but once they understood what we were trying to do, they were actually encouraging us to take things out of the proposal as well, which is useful, and I think it's good to try and build that engagement. And I think there are some opportunities in that space as well. And then the last one, perceptions of success. So again, as has been mentioned, a lot of the landscape literature, there'd be varying perceptions of success. What's good for one person is not good for another. And while it's often attractive to look for the easy wins, and it's an easy sell to say we're looking for win-wins, it's always very important to recognize that there's going to be losers in these processes as well. And if we're forgetting about the losers, then we're not going to find the right strategies to make those losers hopefully turn into the winners. And finally, who leads the landscape process is really important. Who decides who the stakeholders are in the process? And also, who determines when the process ends? Another feedback that we've had is when projects arrive in these landscapes, there's a big fanfare, lots of celebration, and everyone's really happy. When projects end, there's nothing. People just disappear and you don't hear from them again. And so I think that's another thing we need to try and consider. How do we maintain that long-term engagement, whether we're there as researchers or not? Or Dietmar had a great point, like if you can go back to the same landscape with a different institutional hat or with different funding, but it's all about maintaining that longer-term engagement, because we know that the processes that we're trying to understand don't occur in 2 or 3 years. These issues of policy reform, ecological processes, even capacity building, there's been studies to show that capacity building can take 15, 20 years, and then changing people's behavior. Do we even ever do that? So we're not going to get these things answered in the next 2 or 3 years. So final slide, here is where I disagree a little bit with Christopher. I absolutely agree we need to make these things operational. We need to look for simple solutions, but we also must remember to embrace the complexity. And I think a lot of landscape approaches, this is where they fall down, because they do look for these easy wins, easy solutions, and they become too narrow in their focus. And the other thing related to this, I wanted to end positive, and I want to say, the opportunities that are there by embracing this complexity and building these bigger engagement processes. And I think examples from working with donors now, there's calls for 8-10-year funding calls, which is also great to see. But related to this, we need to do a better job of evaluating our progress. And I wanted to end on positive, but I was actually going to make this slide called Embrace Failure, because I think that's something that we've learned we really don't do enough. We're so keen to promote, and I know the incentives are there for us to do that, but we're so keen to promote positive research. Actually, we can learn so much from identifying the things that don't work and learning from lessons from the past. So that's something we're really going to try and do in our project, is not fail all the time, but at least be honest in our reporting and do good science. And I think if we can do that, then we'll have made a contribution towards the literature on landscape approaches. Thank you, and thank you to our partners as well.
Thank you very much, James. And I'm very happy, actually, that you contradicted Christopher, because it was exactly the idea that we get this kind of divergent views here. We are just one further presentation away from a panel discussion, and later on also some Q&A session together with the audience. I would like to invite our last speaker, who is Eike Lüdeling from the University of Bonn, where he leads the Department of Horticulture, and he's going to share some insights into how decision analysis can help us to steer the processes that I think both James and the transformative process that Bernard were calling for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. As Dietmar said, I'm a scientist, and as scientists, we would also like to support landscape approaches and development and all these complex things. And so we've been thinking a lot about how we can make this happen, and we've come across this stuff called decision analysis that I want to introduce you to in the next 8 minutes. So getting landscape approaches to lift off with the insights of decision analysis. No? Okay, sorry. So why do landscape approaches sometimes or possibly even often fail? I think this is the first question that we have to ask ourselves. And I think there are basically 2 categories of reasons that we come across. First of all, there's something we overlooked. Yeah, quite often there's some important things that we somehow missed in our planning. And quite often also people don't expect as we behave. We have certain expectations of what people will do. And of course we perceive all kinds of benefits from adopting the ideas that we present them with. And quite often they just don't do what we expect them to. Now these are big problems, but the question then becomes, how can we avoid such disappointments, and what can we do better maybe to avoid such failures? And I think there are 2 main lessons that we can, or things we can try and do better. We need to get better at anticipating the problems and risks beforehand, basically during the planning stage. And somehow we need ways to forecast the behavior of all our stakeholders. And we have to do this in this jellyfish world that Christopher alluded to, in complex landscapes that are full of uncertainties. We can never expect us to fully understand everything that goes on in a landscape. Yeah? So we somehow have to embrace this complexity, as James just said, and somehow deal with such a situation. And that is actually not something that scientists are usually very comfortable with. This is not the kind of setting that we like. Yeah? We like laboratories, we like controlled trials, etc. And so this is a challenge for us, usually. But it is not actually a situation that we are completely unfamiliar with, because in our everyday lives we face such situations all the time. And basically it's every time that we try and make decisions, we always have to deal with something we don't fully understand. We deal with something that we have a lot of uncertainty about, and with lots of kind of risks and uncertainties that we can't fully grasp. And so this is a challenge that everybody here is familiar with, I'm sure. And a challenge that is not new, and scientists have actually discovered that this is a pretty frequent challenge, and they discovered this hundreds of years ago, and they have literally done centuries of research on such settings, on decision-making under uncertainty. Here's just some fairly recent and pretty readable books on this topic, but there is really a huge body of knowledge and research that we can draw from. There have been Nobel Prizes on this field, etc. And somehow I have a feeling that those of us trained in natural sciences, which is also myself, I must say, we're not really making use of this body of literature and the approaches that are taken there. And so we've taken a look of this and tried exploring what we can learn from these experiences. And I'm saying we, and that also includes the World Agroforestry, where I worked for 8 years before moving to the university here, especially the land health theme of Keith Shepard, where much of this work has been developed. What we've come up with is the idea of decision-focused research, or decision-focused agricultural research, which is a little bit different from how we traditionally work on or explore our these complex development contexts. What we're trying to put together is a pragmatic and solution-oriented research approach, one that does not try and understand systems with all their details, but actually works towards a solution and some way forward and some actual decision support. Where basically we start first with clarifying the decision options. Yeah? So this is not like we have some lofty target. We're actually exploring what can we do, what are the actions that we're proposing, and what are the different alternative pathways we can take. We then try and clarify all our objectives, the objectives of all the other actors that are involved in such a decision, and spell out the impact pathways. So basically, for every option we can take, we explicitly try and figure out what is going to happen, what needs to happen for this to actually have a positive effect. We will then not set up a randomized control trial or the stuff that scientists usually do, but first make use of all the sources of information we can already come across. Or get our hands on. Now, this includes specifically or explicitly, this includes expert and stakeholder knowledge, because if we don't make use of this great resource of information, then we'll be missing out on lots of things we could already know and lots of pitfalls that we can already anticipate early on. And quite frankly, in many settings, this is also the only knowledge that is available. And if you don't make use of it, you can basically only say, we know nothing, so let's try whatever we feel like. So we explicitly make use of this, and we really make an effort to anticipate all risks and uncertainties before we start going into any sort of intervention or recommending any sort of decision option, and then use simulations to produce plausible outcomes distributions for all stakeholders. So what does that mean? Basically, we're making a projection, estimation of what the range of benefits or costs or whatever is that any of the stakeholder can anticipate, rather than making a point prediction saying, well, this farmer is going to be so much richer at the end of the project. We're trying to actually deal here with the uncertainties and embrace this complexity that is a feature of the real world. And finally, once we've done with this, sometimes we can immediately make a recommendation. We can make an estimate of what is the best option, best pathway forward. If that's not possible, we can identify decision-critical knowledge gaps, so the few pieces of information that we really need. Yeah? It's not going to be full knowledge or full understanding on the whole system. That's usually impossible. Quite often, there are a few key pieces of information that we're missing, and those sometimes can be obtained with fairly limited and sometimes pretty cheap targeted research. They can also then be measured. We can narrow these knowledge gaps and update our projections and then get better and better at making recommendations and supporting decisions. A bit more of a graphical view here. This is what this where we always start here. We always start with a decision that is actually on the table somewhere that people are really considering at the moment. Makes it much easier to engage with people and get people interested if this is actually on somebody's agenda. We try to become a different breed of researchers, not the ones that try and find the laws of agriculture or laws of nature or whatever, but ones that focus actually on this decision and explore this in a holistic and participatory decision analysis process. That is holistic because we make an effort of including everything that needs to be included here from the point of view of the actual decision that's to be taken. And it's participatory because we work with the decision makers, if possible, with stakeholders, and also we include experts. So all of these people's knowledge is supposed to be included in this process here. Together we develop an impact model, so basically the pathway for this decision, all the steps that need to follow for us to reach our targets. And we try and summarize the current state of knowledge. So everything that is known about these different variables and processes that are in this model, we try and summarize from the literature, from data sets that we can come across, and also from so-called calibrated experts, which is, well, as a core group, all these people that participated in the assessment, we take them through something called a calibration training, where we equip them with tools to learn to estimate their own uncertainty about things, and this is also then information that feeds into this process. So that the current state of knowledge is usually not precise, it's fuzzy, there are ranges and distributions, it's not really point predictions, but we can still use this kind of information if we run simulations of project outcomes. This is not just a simple spreadsheet, this is a so-called Monte Carlo simulation most of the time, where we actually try and predict the range of outcomes, the distribution of outcomes for all the stakeholders at the end of the day. What comes out of this is forecasts of outcomes that we can then explore and try and identify whether it is already clear which decision option is correct. Is there a clear result? And sometimes that is actually already the case. Sometimes the current state of knowledge is sufficient that we can immediately make a recommendation on how to take a particular decision. If this is not the case, we can identify critical knowledge gaps. Why is it not clear? Why do we not know after this complex analysis what we should be doing? And if we've done this, we can do a bit of targeted decision supporting research that is done for the purpose of supporting this decision and for no other purpose, allowing us to update the state of knowledge, run the simulation again, and cycle through this process as many times as it takes to reach clarity on the way forward. And so this is the idea. We've tried this a few times already. And I'm really quite convinced that this can be an interesting tool for making landscape approaches more effective if we really make a point of identifying all the decisions that need to be taken. It's not only the one by the donor, it's not only our own decision, it's also all the other decisions that have to be taken in the landscape. Most clearly by the farmers, but also by all other actors that are involved in value chains, etc. And we have to map all these critical decision makers in the landscape and understand all their objectives and constraints. Because if we don't understand these objectives, if we believe that farmers are interested in carbon sequestration and all that stuff, we may really, not be able to predict their behavior accurately. So we should then apply this process that I just presented to all these decisions that are taken throughout the landscapes and identify the weakness in our intervention design. So basically look for reasons why the great ideas that we have may fail at whatever level, and see whether there's any reasons for farmers or for anyone else not to take the decisions that we rely on. And once we have a model, and we have a nice model at the end of this process, and this can actually be a nice blueprint also for taking forward through implementation, because we have this impact pathway spelled out, we have a quantitative simulation of what we expect to happen, and this is basically a predictive model that we can then use for designing a monitoring scheme. At every point in time, we can basically look at whether our expectations have materialized. Did what we expect really happen? And if it didn't happen, we have a chance here of knowing this early and implementing what was already alluded to already, an adaptive management scheme, see what we can do better, and we will not have to wait until the end of the project until we know whether we've failed or succeeded. And yeah, this is why I think this has a lot of potential, and decision analysis can be an effective approach to support landscape scale interventions, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Eike, for this kind of science-based decision support to the processes, transformative processes we are looking for. We are running a little bit late, so I would like to call a little bit for your patience. If you want to be with us for the panel discussion and some Q&A later on, we carve out a few minutes of the coffee break, but of course feel free to also grab the coffee if you cannot survive any longer without. So I would like, without further ado, to invite onto the panel a distinguished list of panelists. Steve Laurie, who is Principal Scientist at C4 for Equity, Gender and Tenure. Yapo Asamoy, who is representing Côte d'Ivoire and their Cocoa Forest Initiative. Alexandro Giarca, I might not pronounce your last name correctly, sorry for that, who is a policy officer at the European Commission DEFCO. We would like to invite also Claire Nasike, who is a Food for Livelihoods campaigner at Greenpeace Africa and also the founder of the Hummingbird Foundation. Once again, Bernard Giraud from Livelihoods Venture. Rick Overmars from Stichting Nederlandse Vrijwilligen, as it was called in the past, I think, SNV, the Dutch Development Organization, thank you. Then Pradep Monga, who is the Deputy Executive Secretary from UNCCD. Martin Frick, who is representing UNFCCC. And last but not least, Tony Simons, Director General of World Agroforestry. And then Patrick Worms, who is going to moderate the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Dietmar. And thank you very much, all of you, for the patience that you have displayed. I know it was a fascinating subject, but now we're going to get right into the middle of it. What I heard from all of these presentations is that we humans have a tendency to want to simplify the way things work, but we should embrace complexity, whether it's the heterogeneity of landscapes, the fuzziness of decision-making, the complicatedness of financial flows to people, and the way that we don't know what we're doing. Eike, when I heard you talk about calibration training, I was really hoping we could train every single voter in the Western world before they get into a voting booth into doing that. But that's clearly not possible. And I'm going to start our discussion on this panel by asking Tony, who started from science, who is now the leader of ICRAF, and who has become increasingly interested over the years in the interaction between science and business, between finance and landscapes, to tell us if he's optimistic that what he's heard today is going to lead this planet out of the fix it finds itself in. You all have microphones on your desk. Please, go ahead.
Great. So I started out as a biophysical scientist and then started to appreciate social sciences a lot more. And I think what we've heard today is kind of it's either or. Go with being simple or go with being complex. And there's as much as a role for intuition and expert opinion as there is in the formal decision making, which I think the work that Eike and Keith Shepard have done is very intriguing. But it's not, in all of these things that we're looking at, it's not either or, and it's the combination of the two. And when we look at a landscape and so many actors and so many things inside of it, it typically comes down to the project or to the deal or to the investment or to the enterprise. And we've seen from Livelihoods Fund that those companies are deciding, in the past, we were very good at competing horizontally, but we didn't really understand our vertical supply chain. And it's not that those companies now are wanting to be so vertically integrated that they own the plantations and that they own the aggregators and they own the transport company and they own the mills, and then it eventually ends up in a consumer good. But they realize that they need to understand it. And I think that realization, because as they seek to understand it and to influence others, so the livelihood is a great combination of projects, but it's a very small part of the global supply chain for each of those companies. But it is the learning from that. And I think that in sessions like this, where we can all understand it a little bit more, I think it was James who spoke about the tyranny of log frames and then more recently results-based management approaches. And here, it's about that theory of change. It's about those impact pathways. And we always struggled with donors because we would send a proposal and they'd say, oh yeah, give us a theory of change. And we'd give them to them and say, well, it's not quite what we wanted. Can you have another go? And we'd have another go, not there. And it wasn't until Mind van Noordwijk reminded us that there's actually 3 types of theory of change. and that is the theory of observed change. How does the world work? Do I understand it? The second one is the theory of induced change. So if I poke something or have an intervention or do something different or trigger an investment, what accelerated impact or profit or prosperity or returns do we get from it? And lastly, the theory of context. So all of your theory and all of your experience are not going to work the same everywhere. So how much does a particular community or watershed affect it? And when you combine those three together, that is the theory of change. And so there is elements that we want from each of the presentations that we've seen today. And I think that the most exciting thing is people are saying, well, I know what I can control now, what I can influence, and I'm not going to be overly ambitious and think of the whole Indo-Gangetic plain as my landscape or think of the whole Amazon basin as my landscape. But it is things, particularly with communities and those trigger investments, that will lead to that biggest change.
So it's moving from the top-down approach through the theory of change understanding to effective landscapes at the communities. Alexandru, you're with the European Commission and you are working in the unit that is trying to save biodiversity and restore landscapes. And in fact, full disclosure, we are working together at the moment to regreen 8 countries across Africa. So you operate inside a big complex bureaucracy and you're trying to translate the imperatives that you get from your rules, your regulations, and the transparency that your taxpayer funding demands to the fuzziness of what happens at the level of actual landscapes. How do you deal with that difficulty?
So I think that for the donors community, what is very important is indeed the accountability, and that results are further given further visibility, and that knowledge generated among the different stakeholders is further scaled up. And the Global Landscapes Forum is indeed a good opportunity for this. So we are very thankful for the organizers. I think the 2 very important elements for the upscaling of integrated landscapes approaches that were very much mentioned also during the presentations are inclusive and sustainable investment opportunities that are also able to deliver technical assistance to final beneficiaries and to local lending institutions. We do this, for example, with the European External Investment Funds and also with the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund, to which the European Investment Bank is contributing, or also with the Eco Business Fund in Latin America, which provide not only seed financing for smallholders, but also technical support for final beneficiaries and for the local institutions. It goes without saying that what is very important, of course, in all these investment opportunities is that they have strong social and environmental safeguards and standards. Also in terms of financing, the European Union in particular also disposes a smaller amount of grants that are used, as you said, to leverage these additional investments, but also to pilot integrated approaches, for example, in the 8 countries that you mentioned in Africa that we are doing together. This allows us to break silos not only within partner organizations like you and C4, but also within the national governments and within our own organization as well. The second important element for us, which was also highly mentioned, is the good governance opportunities and strengthened land tenure and rights. The European Union is supporting, for example, more than 40 countries in good land governance and land tenure as a basis for responsible investments opportunities. We also support, for example, the land metrics, which helps increase transparency over land-based investments and also avoid land grabbing. So yeah, to sum up, these 2 elements, I think, are the most important for us, and I'm glad that this were also mentioned by the colleagues today and pointed out by the research.
Thank you. It's still interesting to see how you have these complex instruments that you're putting into the landscape that you want full accountability and transparency on rightly, but that have to operate in the stochasticity of a landscape. One of the 40 countries in which you operate, trying to do this, is of course Kenya. And Claire, you are an activist there. You are a climate activist with Greenpeace, and you have your own foundation, the Hummingbird Foundation. So you deal with people who demand change, who may not necessarily understand the complexities of how these big institutions operate, but who are farming and who are living their everyday life. How do you deal with that from your perspective? How do you deal with the fact that the people that you're sitting with here and the people who fund you, presumably, operate in these big complex bureaucracies, but the people that you have to help generally do not know how to interact with these institutions?
Thank you very much, Patrick. So the people we work with, which are smallholder farmers under Greenpeace Africa, these are farmers who understand what are the needs of their communities. What exactly are they trying to do in those particular communities? So when it comes to ecological agriculture, they know exactly that they are trying to increase their crop yields, and at the same time they're trying to protect their water resources, they're trying to protect their soils from contamination. So when you move as a donor and you're trying to bring in a new concept of probably subsidized agrochemicals or subsidized fertilizers, you are not helping these people. These people really want to, achieve what they want with the resources that they have at the local level. So when you bring in a new concept, it's like you're bringing in something so alien to them or something so strange to them that they don't know how to relate to it. So most of the time what we do with the farmers is that we try to bring together the donors and the farmers and let the farmers speak to their needs and tell these donors what exactly do we need and how are we going to do it. Because at some point, the funding ends, and when it does end, these projects stop. And when these projects stop, these farmers need to be able to continue running some of the projects by themselves, so that you as an NGO or you as a civil society or as a donor, when you're not in that process, you're not in that space to be able to continue running the project, they can independently run these projects themselves. And so it's all about the local needs, the local resources. How are they able to continue running the projects when NGOs are no longer able to do so?
Excellent, thank you. You are, in fact, a kind of facilitator, almost a translator between the farmers and the NGOs, the farmers and the donors. But there's another body that's really important in those countries, and that's the kind of body that you represent, Mr. Yapo. You are from the Cocoa and Forest Initiative, and that means you are in some way in a position similar to Claire's. On the one hand, you have big industry, you have donors, you have the UN system that is forcing you to try to do certain things. On the other hand, you have a large population of farmers who are trying to better their livelihoods by farming this essential commodity. And we all know the difficulties that they have in doing this sometimes, because they are, as Bernard pointed out to us, so often at the mercy of global commodity price swings, which they simply cannot control. So you act as a buffer, perhaps, between the bracing winds of international capitalism and the farms of your country. Perhaps you could explain to us how you manage that difficult task.
Yeah. I try to speak in English. I think it's a great opportunity now that some of the great companies of chocolate industry understand the challenge we face to stop deforestation due to, for example, cocoa. It's a good opportunity. Now we have some challenges. So how can we involve small farmers and their community in addressing the challenges for climate change? For them to be very good in that, we need, first of all, to seek for economic opportunity for them, viability of the business. If you can convince them to really invest, to earn, to get income, as long as they can involve also agroforestry, it will be a good thing. The challenge we have, now that we have developed action plan, all of us have agreed to do that. We need to address the challenge related to funding. It's good to sign agreement like we have done in last November in here, Bonn, 2017, with the great 30 company of cocoa industry is now to put money on the ground. That's why I really appreciate the communication made by my neighbor here on livelihood. So we need, the challenge is, first of all, to build capacity for farmers and the community on agroforestry, for example, to train them on finance literacy so that they can embrace the complexity of landscape approach.
And if the farmers do that, will they get better livelihood? Is that something that your experience makes you confident they will achieve?
Honestly, I think if they do that, we have a good enabling environment in terms of pricing, for example. I'm sure you all of you here a couple of weeks ago, then, for example, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire are trying to push to have a pricing flow. If the industry also, our objective is to improve farmer income. If they can accept these two things, the good price, build capacity of farmers in terms of technical to adopt the best agricultural practices, including agroforestry, adopt the best practice on finance literacy, then we can improve the livelihood through increasing income and adopting best agricultural practices, including agroforestry.
Thank you. Pradeep, you sit near the top of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. And what we heard earlier from Bernard is that business, or at least to quote your words, Bernard, the more sustainable businesses are beginning to get it. They understand that they have to support farmers. They understand that they have to have long-term relationships. They understand that the positive impacts that we all want them to have on the landscapes can only come if they do it this way. We've just heard from Mr. Yapo that in Côte d'Ivoire, they're trying to move in that direction too by having pricing floors. And we've heard from Claire, of course, that there is a big, strong move to try to get the NGOs and the farmers to collaborate more productively. We've also heard from Alexandru that the donors are beginning to become increasingly concerned about this and putting money behind it. We heard from Tony, however, that maybe not all business is beginning to get it. Now I'm going to ask you, I'm going to put you in the position of the referee. You sit at the Convention to Combat Desertification. Your job is to save this planet by preventing it from turning into a radioactive desert. We'll leave the radioactive bit for the Security Council, but the desert bit is for you. Now, when you see these initiatives, are you encouraged because we're moving in the right direction? Or are you discouraged because while these are all very good initiatives, the vast world outside of this meeting room couldn't care less and is continuing to trash this planet at an accelerated rate?
Thank you, Patrick. I hope it's working, yes. Thank you. I think they are very positive signs. I must say that when we hear about such good examples around the world, in UNCCD, we realize that there are a couple of challenges we are facing, why we are not scaling up such positive examples. So, previous speakers already mentioned fragmentation of agenda at different levels. We are also talking about silos. I always feel surprised when I attend UNCCD meetings that how scientists, experts, policymakers, they really come together. And this is a very good sign here when I see businesses sitting together and talking about hard talk. What we normally see in climate change, if I take example, it doesn't happen in land degradation issues. The challenge is how we connect the dots first, very importantly at every level. Even within UN system, how far we can work together between 3 Rio conventions, climate change, land degradation, and biodiversity. Because land agenda is not only a business model, land agenda is not only jobs, not only income generation, land agenda is also to address climate solutions, climate action, also achievement of SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So in my view, the challenge is how we make, if I may allow me to use landscape restoration ecosystem approach, where we have smart policies, innovative financing, creative entrepreneurship, of course, gender empowerment, and most importantly, capacity building or knowledge management. And I do believe the time has come to really come up with a new narrative. Before joining at UNCCD, for 16 years, I worked as Director of Energy Climate Change. I attended a lot of meetings there. And do realize the kind of passion, emotions, protest, contradictions come in the climate debate. It should be coming here. Because we have to have new narrative where we must reach out to our political leadership. We are not able to translate. Businesses, small-scale farmers and others only can work if we have political leadership. But we also need champions in businesses. We are also champions at the grassroots level, what we call land warriors. So these are the ways I do believe, and we are moving ahead, but still, I feel it's a drop in the ocean. Lot yet to be done.
Pradeep, in a couple of months, you will have your COP, the Conference of the Parties in New Delhi. That means all of the nations of the world, or almost all of them, all those who have signed up to the convention, will be there to trash out what to do next. What do you hope? What do you expect from that?
Thank you, Patrick, for pointing out. We have a COP14 happening in Delhi from 2nd to 13th of September. And for the first time, we are trying to discuss some of the connecting the dots, I said, issues directly, dealing with land, tenure, and climate change, and also bringing renewable energy for access agenda. Second, we are trying to see how land tenure systems, especially the land rights, governance issues become very, very relevant for policymakers to understand on that. Third, we are coming out very clear message that if we invest in land, we are investing in our 2030 development agenda. We are investing in our climate solutions because land always is obvious. It's almost 1/4 of carbon sink in the world, but why people are not moving into that? Why businesses, why NGOs and others? We have very good examples, but I still feel there's a fraction of that. And most importantly, at COP14 in India, we're trying to have this new narrative coming up, where the people and the political leadership coming along, together with experts, scientists, and others present here. Normally in landscape restoration, we talk with converts only. We want to bring other constituency very strongly here, because we must scale up. What we do, 10 million hectares in a year or 100 million, we should be doing more than that, doubling of that income, doubling of that efforts at every level. And this COP14, I think, will really come up with a very clear message, especially coming after China, which hosted COP13, that together we can really make a difference, especially taking landscape restoration efforts.
Thank you. Steve, you've heard it from the horse's mouth. The nations of the world are going to step up their efforts and are going to scale up what we all know works. Are you optimistic that they will be able to do this, that they will succeed? Do you see 1,000 butterflies of spring rising on our planet?
Actually, I'm sort of by nature an optimist, and I want to be optimistic, but I'm not terribly optimistic. You know, we all understand these are very complex problems, that it's a real struggle, there's a long road ahead of us. But I want to come back for a second to our understanding of landscapes, which I think we've drifted in and out of sort of the landscape kind of discussion, I think. And I think, Patrick, at the outset you said, you asked us, do we know what we're doing? I think we're trying to do something, but I'm not sure yet we know how to think about what we're doing, which is kind of a fundamental problem, I think, with respect to this. And I like to think about landscapes as context. You know, Tony mentioned, you know, the theory of context is one of the three theories in the structure. I think the central theory is not necessarily about understanding different contexts. It's about understanding the landscape approach is about understanding context. It really should be thought of as, if you will, the art and science of context. And we've got a problem here, I think, in our understanding of the natural world and how people relate to it. We've got a huge problem with respect to social media, for instance, which is a sort of becoming sort of an instrument of governance in one way or another alongside markets and the state. Because, for instance, in social media exchanges, they take place in the absence of context, often. This is, you know, we have algorithms that basically channel people to certain views, to certain similar views, so on and so forth. Our discourse becomes divided. Our contexts sort of break down, okay? In fact, we have something that an artist at Stanford, Ginny Odell, calls context collapse. Context collapse. And this is what we see in landscapes, because we're unable to see them holistically in terms of, we don't approach them as understanding the entire context from the outset, but from trying to sort of struggle with a kind of reality that we also project, that in fact they're fractured and broken up, as opposed to understanding them as holistic, having a reason and a rationale and aspects of severe dysfunction. But if we don't start with the notion of here is the context within which we're working, then we're really cooked. I mean, we're really not going to get very far. So I want to sort of advocate for an idea of really landscapes as the study and the art of context, sort of a landscape science. So I often, from time to time, I get asked by a donor, how can you help us? Or that's my ideal question, which we're asked more often because they're often seeking something that they think they need very specifically. And my ideal answer is, I can help you understand the context in which you're working. Because we find so many development programs being about a preset sort of formulation of what the problems are, with solutions often taken from another context, more familiar to the donor, for instance, or based on theory, and then seeking to apply it to a quite different context. And that's the beginning of trouble with respect to the development paradigm.
Context obviously matters enormously, and Rick, you come from a country where context matters perhaps more than any place else. 1/3 of your country is below sea level, and yet you're one of the most prosperous countries in the world. People talk of the polder model, which is a way of doing governance to allow both the private sector to thrive while taking care of the Commonwealth. It's a very specific context, but you operate in an aid organization, and you're imbued with that polder model. How do you bring that model and the best of that model to the work that you do when you're out in the countryside? How do you take your experience and repackage it for a world that operates in a very, very different context? How do you meet Stephen's challenge?
Well, indeed, the Netherlands, of course, is quite a champion in the polder model and getting collective solutions and agreements, because otherwise the dikes would have been broken and we would have been flooded already a long time ago. And we do a bit of this in our work. We operate over 100 programs in landscapes and value chains in 30 countries in the world. And we often use a multi-stakeholder approach. But one of the learnings there is that you do need a kind of broker and to navigate through these differences in interests, through the different power relations which are there and the different capacities as well. And capacity building is certainly an issue which you need to address in those type of multi-institutional settings. And I think trust building is very important to be effective in a landscape approach. And we as NGOs also have learned the hard way that understanding of business interest and farmers' interest is very important. Farmers are not in homogeneous groups. There are conflicting interests. There are many different farmer segments, and I always hear smallholder farmers. There is not just a smallholder farmer. And I think that's very important to incorporate in your approach. And also the different businesses. Bernard was speaking about the efforts of the Livelihood Fund and with the MNCs, and I really applaud that this is going forward, because in our experience it's often very important to have the medium-sized national companies, and they are there and they are not that flexible to move out into a market or not. And they are sometimes being there in that landscape to work with the local stakeholders. And government relations and government business relations, there's a lot of mistrust. And I think that brokering and that facilitation of that is important. The understanding of the underlying reasons of that, and that requires a good political understanding. And in the decision-making modeling, political economy is very important to understand what are the different interests of the different power groups and to do something or not to do something. And then lastly, in government, to support government and local governance in also enforcement of agreements. And if you have in a landscape approach and collective agreed way forward, then it also must be enforced. So I think that's also a very important point.
Martin, you're the Director of Policy at the UNFCCC, that institution that I apologetically said had failed early on today. And sometimes I think of your job as that of herding cats, because On the one hand, you've got states like the island states who are screaming in blue panic. On the others, you've got states like Poland or Russia or Saudi Arabia that remind me of St. Augustine. You know, yes, lead me to sanctity, Lord, but not just yet. Now, from the perspective of land, climate has often ignored it. It's only recently that the climate change agenda, at least the international climate change agenda that you represent, has taken land on board. Now, when we all heard that, we land restorers, we had a collective sigh of relief, and now we wonder, how much progress has there been in that field? And how much do you see the parties to the Framework Convention on Climate Change embracing the land restoration agenda?
Well, thank you, Patrick. Before I start, this is such a gender unbalanced panel. Let me just say I would not be here without two wonderful women, my mother and my sister, and that needs to be said in defense. Now, a climate process, what can it do? What is it that it can't do? If you look at 25 years of climate negotiations, you had the slide up, there was a fundamental change after Copenhagen. Before Copenhagen, we were negotiating a top-down instrument that would be ratified and turn into national legislation. After Copenhagen, and the Paris Agreement is that, we're working on the basis of a bottom-up approach. Every nation does its own climate plans. And the UN framework, our convention, is basically reporting and checking about the obligations of countries. But it is in the countries that these obligations are taken. And the climate action is in the countries. And fundamentally important are the nationally determined contributions, the national climate plans. And still so few people know even about the existence of these plans. 2012, Rio+20 had the slogan, "The future we want." These climate plans are actually defining the future we want. And I would go back in political theory and even say these are the new social contracts, because in that, countries are defining what will be our future in 30, 40, 50 years. Now, the basic question of this workshop this morning is, why are we not scaling up? And I think fundamentally, because those who are the actors here, the smallholder farmers, have no voice, have no power, have no influence. And from a climate perspective, I think what must happen, so that the wonderful examples that you showed and other panelists shared are really becoming large-scale policies, is an awareness and a process around the formulating of national climate plans in which these farmers have a voice, and we do everything we can to have these inclusive processes. And I know and I hope, but working on it, that in the Secretary General Summit this September, the Secretary General will actually say to heads of state and governments, I want you to run inclusive processes to define these climate plans because they matter for your country and they matter for the planet. Thanks.
Thank you. You rightly pointed out how gender unbalanced our panel is, but it is also completely sectorally unbalanced. As you pointed out earlier, Bernard, you're the only business representative in this room full of scientists and bureaucrats. So let me give you the final word, Bernard. You've sat here, you have shared the wonderful work you're doing, you have heard from various perspectives what is happening to try to make this world a world that is taking land restoration more seriously, but you've also heard some criticism. How do you leave this workshop?
Well, I'm not naive. Even if I explain that there are really good signs for hope, well, the dominant world today is made with traders, with companies that do not care about landscape and smallholder farmers. This is the reality. The world is made with governments that are corrupted or inefficient in many cases. But there are two things that make me optimistic. First is the consciousness. If we didn't talk about the fact that the young generation now is embarking, climate is a bit theoretical, but if you look at biodiversity, for example, the understanding of why the simplification that has been driven by the industry is making harm to the planet, whether it is plants or animals or whatever, is very well understood more and more. And when we look at the last elections in Europe, for example, we can see that the young generation is well aware and embarking, and they don't want anymore this world. Will they have an influence to really change the game? I don't know. But I can see that companies that don't understand this change will lose their business in the coming decades. It will take a few years, maybe not 3 decades. And I can see that more and more companies understand that they have to make the switch. The second thing that makes me optimistic is the fact that a few years ago, you could be a large company and ignore where your raw material is coming from. Today, it's not anymore possible. You cannot say, I don't know where my cocoa, my vanilla, my sugar cane comes from. And the technologies are helping a lot. More and more, we will be able to trace from, today it's from supplier to the big industry, but tomorrow it will come soon from the smallholder farmers to the cooperative, to the processors, to the final industry. So, and the consumer at the end. And the consumer will know. And with conscious consumers, there will be a driving change. I feel confident that it will happen. And the industry will do it not because they are good people or bad people. They will do it because it has a business sense.
Claire, you are the only young person, and not just the only woman here. We, my generation, we are handing you this hot potato of a rapidly degrading planet. We had earlier on a young climate activist from Nigeria substantially giving us the same message, and we had Bernard now, a wizened old businessman, telling us that it's in your generation that change is beginning to happen. Can you confirm that? Can you confirm that across the board in your generation, people are becoming sufficiently worried about the degradation of their environment to begin to take meaningful action about it? And by meaningful action, I don't mean just going to a meeting, but I mean changing their behaviors, voting differently, encouraging their communities to change their behavior.
Young people are consistently worried about the current rate of degradation happening to our environment. And that's why you find that we've got a lot of young people coming up with startups to help reduce the amount of plastics in the environment, startups to help farmers, smallholder farmers access organic farmers markets. So we are consistently worried about our environment, and we're putting up initiatives to help solve the issues that are currently causing degradation in our environment. And particularly you find that most young people, we just don't come to meetings to attend meetings for the sake of it. We come to learn. We learn from people like you. We learn from Tony. We learn from Pradeep. People like you are the people that have the information. When we come together, we come here to learn. And when we go back, we're going back to implement some of these solutions and some of these things that we've learned from such forums. So we've been given an opportunity as young people to learn, and we're taking it up upon ourselves to implement some of the solutions. We understand that you guys are also aging, so we have to so we have to take it upon ourselves to implement these solutions. Like particularly in Kenya, I run the Hummingbird Foundation. And with the Hummingbird Foundation, we are trying to set up food gardens for school children in the slums. So if I didn't get the knowledge that school children in the slums, the environment is polluted, they have no access to food. Most of them go to school on an empty stomach. And some of them don't even know where food comes from. When you ask them, they tell you, from the supermarket or from somewhere else. So we're taking that initiative to teach children how to grow food, how to conserve the environment, how to protect their soil, how to protect their water sources. So yes, young people are coming up with initiatives to conserve the environment.
That's encouraging news. Ladies and gentlemen, I have successfully managed to keep you from filling your stomach as well, because as I understand it, coffee break is finishing roughly now? In 5 minutes. So please join me in thanking our fantastic panel. I hope you are as encouraged as I am by what we've heard today. And don't leave yet, because Dietmar has a final surprise in store for us.
It's not a surprise, actually, but really, I would like to give a big thanks to you, first of all, to the audience who has been bearing with us, because really sorry that we were running over time. Sorry also that we didn't have sufficient time also to allow for questions from your end. So I would really like to encourage you now to, for the last drips of coffee that might be out there, to take that kind of opportunity and engage with the distinguished list of speakers and panelists. And I would really like to thank all of you. Claire's words from the younger generation, very well taken. I mean, you have been here facing an older generation, if you will, that is as much aging as the farming populations are aging. But for me, it has been also truly inspiring to interact with you up front and also with Nesrin, who presented here in a virtual way, to really see there is a younger generation coming and that really is ready to take up the task and the challenge at hand. We still would hope that we not only hand over a hot potato to you, but there's also something around it that really makes up for a good diet that later on can be consumed by each and everyone. So thanks. I don't think we have a final conclusion, actually, whether it's a jellyfish or a boxfish type of approach. Probably we need some kind of a middle ground, and I do hope we got sufficient food for thought that we now can discuss over there, over coffee. Thank you very much.